Welcome to Glocal Voices, the official podcast of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Glocal Voices. My name is Taiwo Afolabi from the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina in Canada. We're on another episode of Glocal Voices within the series of IDIERI 11th, which we did at the on-site recording at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And then today we're going to be talking to Dr. Kelly McConville. I do hope I pronounced that name correctly.
You do. Except for the doctor, I'm not quite a doctor yet.
Almost a doctor, yes.
Almost.
Very, very soon. Very soon. So we're going to be talking to Kelly today about our research on research-based theater and the adaptation process of Reformed. As part of the Festival of Art and Discourse, this series is also dedicated to that. A shout out to my team at the center, Tara Eldred, who's sort of the admin kind of helping us put all of this together. Of course, Gabriel Friday, Caleb Adeshina, Walter Stridham, and Shola for their technical support at the on-site recording. And really want to thank Theatre Emissary International and Mobile Research Lab for giving us the license to run the Festival of Arts and Discourse. So I want to pass it on to Kelly to introduce herself and give us sort of context and positionality about her work and the research that she's doing. So over to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Taiwo. My name is Kelly McConville. I'm from the University of Melbourne, where I'm a PhD candidate. I'm also the Executive Officer of Drama Victoria, which is the peak body for drama education, where I live in the state of Victoria in Australia. I'm really excited to be given the opportunity to share a little bit of my work today. My PhD study focuses on audience responses to research-based theatre. So I'm really curious about what happens after an audience engages with a piece of research-based theatre, not necessarily from an evaluative perspective, but kind of like a process of and what we can learn from their responses moving forward. So what I'll talk about today is the piece of research-based theatre that I staged a couple of years ago now for Australian audiences in Melbourne, particularly where I live. The piece of research-based theatre that I staged was actually an adaptation of Professor Peter Duffy's work. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Professor Peter Duffy, first of all, get familiar. He's amazing. Second of all, he is at the University of South Carolina, and he conducted a piece of research with hundreds of teachers across the state, many of whom had left the profession. And through surveys and interviews, he analysed all of this data and produced a script that really engaged with why teachers stay in the profession, why they leave the profession, and the tensions that lie within their decisions to stay or go. I wanted to focus on audience responses for my PhD, and therefore writing a piece of research-based theatre from scratch was not really an option because it can take years to create a piece of research-based theatre. So when I read Professor Duffy's script, I was really struck by how relevant the themes that he explored were to the Australian context. It's teachers leaving the profession is a global issue. Not having enough teachers to teach the students coming through is a global issue, and a lot of the reasons, certainly in the States, really resonate with the reasons that teachers aren't engaging with the profession in Australia. So I sort of hit the jackpot in that sense. I thought, okay, here's a great script that I can stage. But what I really wanted to ensure was that my audience could really relate to the characters and the context that they were being presented with, so that their responses could be particularly relevant to the context, and they weren't kind of having to do that additional labor of going, oh, well, that's what's happening in the States, that character's, I don't see that character in my own workplace, so on and so forth. So I set about a process of adaptation, which was a really interesting process to go down for ethical reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of really what I'd like to explore today.
And Kelly, what was that process about? What was how did the adaptation process? Could you walk us through that? What was the process for you? How did you go about the process, particularly thinking about research-based theater?
Yeah, it was layered and complex, but incredibly important and rewarding in the end. So initially there was some really obvious things that stood out to me that needed to be changed. So just even things like educational acronyms, so SATs as opposed to, what we call the VCE over here and things like that. So that kind of surface level, that was pretty easy just to make some direct changes. A really kind of key part of the adaptation process was that I casting Australian actors to play Australian characters, I ensured that all of the actors had education backgrounds. So a number of the cast were classroom teachers. A lot of them were drama teachers because obviously they have that kind of performance skill. There were actors who had done teacher training, but had never kind of pursued it or had moved into different careers. I had one actor who was trained as a teacher and then moved into social work, but they all had that grounding, which was really, really important. So during the rehearsal process, there were instances in which I would say to the teachers, does this resonate with your experience the way this is said? And they would say, no, actually, this is more how it is in my context. So we might have changed a line or two. So references to things like parent-teacher interviews, which used to be, I think they were referred to as being 15 minutes in person in the original script. And we were performing this in a post-COVID context, and that parent-teacher interviews were 5 to 10 minutes online in some instances. So, even just that recontextualization to refer to how things had shifted since pre-COVID. So it was really engaging with the actors on those sorts of things. One particularly interesting change that I had to make, which we really kind of had to grapple with quite a lot. There was an African-American character in the performance, or in the original script rather, and their kind of journey was really important, and what they represented in the play was really important, because obviously there was a large discussion about race, and that was really, really relevant in the US context, and equally relevant for different reasons in the Australian context. So we made the decision quite early on to make that character a First Nations Australian character. And so I had a fabulous First Nations actor who came on board. And there was a key scene where a student of colour had argued with a teacher who was a white teacher about the choice to explore To Kill a Mockingbird. And this student had a real issue with that text having been selected and the way that they were approaching it. And the white teacher, who was a new teacher, went to the teacher of colour to basically ask them for advice, which was really them asking the teacher to deal with the student. And so a really, really important interaction and a story from Professor Duffy's research. So I really wanted to, it was really, really important to keep that story there. And it was really important to keep that tension between how teachers approach students of different backgrounds and manage a curriculum that, students are starting to push back against in some respects. They're becoming really socially aware as social media informs them of different perspectives and all that sort of stuff. So at first, we decided to keep the scene exactly as it was in the original. Keep the text To Kill a Mockingbird, because it is something that I've taught. I'm an English teacher in Australia, and I've taught To Kill a Mockingbird in the past. So we thought we would keep that. And then when we'd sort of worked with the scene, so it was a First Nations student feeling like perhaps this wasn't the right choice of text, going to this young teacher and kind of, kicking off a bit about this text, and then this young teacher going to this First Nations teacher, and pretty much it played out as it did in the original. Move forward to when we were going to stage the performance initially, and we weren't ready. We were not ready for this performance to go live. I was working with teacher actors, and these teacher actors were busy. And just some of them just hadn't had time to learn lines, or the whole cast hadn't even been in the same room by the time that performance was coming around. So I had to make a call, and I decided to make that performance a work in progress performance for an audience.
Okay.
And what opportunity that opened up for us was kind of really important in the adaptation process.
Okay.
I took the audience through the audience response process that I had always planned.
That's right.
And they provided incredible feedback
Okay.
on moments that took them out of the Australian context.
Okay. Yeah.
And the reference to that text was one of them.
Interesting.
For them, having a First Nations student take issue with a US-based text just reminded them of the origins of the script. They knew that it was originally performed in the US. And so we changed that script. We changed that text. We changed it.
The reference, yeah.
We changed it. That's right. We changed it to a book that is explored over here called Jasper Jones, which hasn't received the same level of criticism as To Kill a Mockingbird has, in the sense of like a white savior narrative.
That's right.
However, it's still, it's written by a white author. It's told from the perspective of a white character about these First Nations people that live in this character's town. So it kind of ticked some of the boxes on that front. And you could understand why a student might have a real issue, because, on page 1, I think it is, the description of this Aboriginal boy that lives in this town, it just depicts him in the most stereotypical way. And although that is unpacked later, you could sort of see how a student who feels completely underrepresented in the country would read that and just go, why would I continue with this? Why are we engaging with this? So it was really, really important. The work in progress for the adaptation was so important. I have various other instances of things that the audience said that that led to really, really important changes in the final performance. And in fact, I had people who came to both the work in progress and the performance event at the end, and they were like, yeah, that was so important for my ability to respond to it later on.
Interesting. So what are the, and I don't want you to, share your PhD research yet here, but what are some of the maybe preliminary findings or ideas that you want to share with us that, coming out of this work, that connect to your, to your research?
Yeah, I mean, I guess whether to include insights about the adaptation process was a point of contention, I think, throughout. When you're working in a PhD that is about audience responses, you have your data, which is your audience responses. You've got your methodology, which is how you went about collecting those audience responses. Where the adaptation process sat, or sits rather, within the actual PhD is something that my supervisors and I really have had to grapple with. And in the end, we've realized that it's an incredibly important part of the process, because what the audience responds to and how they were set up to respond in that way, and that audience-centric ethic that I had right from the outset of creating this piece, it was so strong and drove every choice that I made. It was from getting the script, it was, how is this setting my audience up to respond and talk about their own context? And whilst that's there in every research-based theatre piece and in every theatre piece, whether explicitly or not, we're always thinking about audience. Because mine was so explicitly focused on audience, that audience-centric ethic, from the moment of reading Professor Duffy's script to adapting it and presenting it to Australian audiences and having them respond, that has to be in my PhD. That has to be there. So I guess that's, without going any further into findings, all that sort of stuff, I think, the thing that I hope will be of interest to people is really shining a light on the audience-centric ethic in an explicit manner, rather than it being potentially, in some cases, a bit of an afterthought, which is, of course we're going to stage this to an audience and we want to know how it impacts them, so we'll evaluate it with them afterwards, but let's really focus on this performance. It's a slight shift of focus, not a big one. It's very, very slight, but what that allows us to do, I think, in research-based theatre is draw on a lot of insights from spectatorship research, from audience studies that sit within theatre and performance studies. It allows us to draw on that literature a little bit more and just deepen our appreciation and understanding of the place of audience within our work.
Interesting. I mean, I love and it's this is like a very, sounds like it wasn't planned for, but it happened based on the process, the work in progress performance. That, I think, that particular, and it happenstance, right? From what way you described it, but that just helped you to think about research-based theater, offer that opportunity to think about it differently in terms of the approach, and that performance in draft alone, and how that feedback from the audience, then taking that to put it, how that shaped the final output and the performance itself. My final question for you here, as you walk through your writing and trying to do all the deliverables and your thesis and all of that, how has this research changed you? If it has, or maybe how has it informed your process? Think differently and things like that.
That's a really great question. I think for me, the question of audience has always sat with me since the moment I discovered research-based theatre, which was, for me, as soon as I learned about it and was introduced to it, I identified with what research-based theatre in all its multiple forms really endeavours to do, and the purpose it endeavours to serve. I always felt that the place of the audience was something that was really, really important. And I couldn't articulate what it was about audiences and the question around that, what it was that really bugged me. And now I think I have learnt that audiences hold the key to prolonging the life of a research-based theatre inquiry. And I think I think we've always known that. Like, I'm not saying this is something that I've discovered or come across by any stretch of the imagination. But for me and my appreciation and understanding of the role of the audience, it's made me understand the multiple ways in which we can engage with audiences throughout the life of a piece of research-based theatre, not to prolong, just to clarify what I was saying before, not in order to prolong the life of the research-based theatre piece, but to deepen the inquiry and extend it so that it's future focused.
Interesting.
How can this situation be, if what we are seeing on stage, which is a situation that we think should not be how it is, right? So research-based theatre, we're obviously often working with marginalised groups or disenfranchised groups and presenting them on stage to an audience, essentially saying, hey guys, this shouldn't be like this. Don't you agree? And then the audience say, yes, we agree. It shouldn't be like this. And this is how I experience it. And this is what it means to me. Inherent within that is a question, then how do we want it to be? And I think audiences can help us with that. I think for me, that's the joy of research-based theatre, is working with audiences to say, how do we want this to be different in the future? And that for me is really interesting. And when you include audiences as part of that process, not just as sources of data, then and there's that ethic of care from
Ethics, yes,
very start right through to how you engage with them.
That's right.
And beyond, then I think that is really exciting because there's that forward momentum then.
That's right. Interesting. And you did mention the ethical part of it, where there's a lot of ethical questioning you need to ask and to really, really explore to be able to move audience from just data, from gathering data from them to be co-researchers, as it were, to help us envision new possibilities.
That's right.
Which I think that's really beautiful. But this is really great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Kelly.
Thank you.
And now I'm gonna look forward to when your thesis is out. I'd love to read it.
Hopefully not too far away. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I've been talking to Kelly McConville on research-based theatre, particularly focusing on adaptation process of reformed play by Professor
Peter Duffy.
Peter Duffy from the US. This is really great. Thank you so much. And then again, this is Taiwo Afolabi, and thanks for being for listening to this episode of Glocal Voices. And I see you in another episode.
You have been listening to Glocal Voices, the official podcast of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina. For more details about the center, visit www.cset.ca.